The advertisement was handwritten in charcoal on the back of a flour sack. Someone had nailed it to the post outside Decker's General Store in Coldwater, Nevada, a town so forgotten by God and government alike that the mail rider only came through twice a month. And half the time he didn't bother stopping. The words were rough, uneven, written by a hand more accustomed to an axe handle than a pen. Widower. 6 children. Ages 2 to 13. Live alone in the Sierra foothills, 12 miles from town. Need a woman of steady character to help manage the household. Honest work. Fair arrangement. No drinkers. No liars. Inquire, Elias Cord Ranch, Pine Creek Road. Most women who read it laughed. Not out of cruelty. Out of exhaustion. Because most women in Coldwater in 1879 had enough trouble feeding themselves, let alone 6 children belonging to a man they'd never laid eyes on. But one woman didn't laugh. She stood in front of that flour sack for a long time. Long enough that the storekeeper came to the window to see if she'd fainted. Her name was May Sutton. 34 years old. Thin as winter light. She'd been married once, to a cattleman named Holt Sutton who died of fever 3 years back, and in 9 years of marriage she'd never once been able to carry a child to term. The town knew it. The way small towns always know things they have no business knowing. She'd been called barren to her face. By women who claimed to be her neighbors. By men who considered it an explanation for everything that had ever gone wrong in her life. She read that flour sack a second time. Then she pulled a pencil from her coat pocket, tore a strip from the bottom of the sack, and wrote her own name and address on it. She folded it. Walked inside. Handed it to the storekeeper. Next time you see Elias Cord, she said quietly, give him that. What happened next would change both their lives in ways either of them could have possibly prepared for. And before this story is over, you'll understand exactly why some wounds in this world cannot be healed. Only survived. The wagon came for her on a Tuesday. May heard it before she saw it, the slow, deliberate creak of iron wheels on hard-packed earth. The heavy breath of draft horses climbing the slight grade toward the 2-room cabin she'd been renting on the edge of Coldwater for the past 2 years. She was already standing on the porch when it arrived. The man driving it was not what she expected. She'd pictured something weathered and broken, a man hollowed out by grief, by the daily impossible labor of raising 6 children alone on a mountain ranch. A man running on fumes and stubbornness. Elias Cord was weathered, yes, but not broken. He was tall, somewhere in his early 40s, with a jaw like quarried stone and dark eyes that moved carefully before the rest of him did. He wore a canvas coat despite the heat, and he held the reins with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent most of his life outdoors. His beard was trimmed but not neat. His hat was old but well kept. He stopped the wagon. Looked at her. Said nothing for a beat too long. "You're May Sutton," he finally said. Not a question. "I am." He nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something he'd already decided about her from the storekeeper's note. Then he climbed down from the bench with the careful movement of a man carrying an old injury, and he extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm but not performative. No point to prove. "You know what you're coming into?" he asked. "6 children and hard work," she said. "Yes." Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite a smile. More like the memory of one. "The children aren't easy," he said. "The youngest 2 still cry at night. The older ones," he paused. Looked out toward the mountains. "They're angry. You understand? Their mother died 14 months ago, and they haven't finished being angry about it yet. I don't know if they're going to be kind to you." May looked at him steadily. "I'm not going there to be liked," she said. "I'm going to be useful." Elias Cord studied her face the way you study weather coming over a ridge, trying to decide if it's going to be a problem or a blessing. "All right," he said. The drive to Cord Ranch took the better part of 3 hours. The road climbed steadily into the Sierra foothills, pine trees thickening on either side until the sky above them narrowed to a pale blue strip. Elias drove in silence for most of it, and May didn't push. She'd learned long ago that the quietest people often had the most to say. They were simply choosing their moment. She watched the land instead. Felt the temperature drop as the elevation climbed. Smelled the pine resin and the cold thread of creek water somewhere off to the left. This was not the flat, brittle desert of Coldwater. This was something older and more serious. "How long have you been out here?" she asked, sometime in the second hour. "Born here," he said. "My father built the original cabin in 1841. I expanded it when I married." "And your wife?" The silence that followed was answer enough, but he gave her one anyway. "Clara was from Sacramento." "She came out here for the same reason you're coming," answered a notice. "Mine wasn't so different from the one I posted this time." He kept his eyes on the road. "She stayed. We had 6 children. She got sick last March, and she was dead by May." The flatness in his voice wasn't coldness. May recognized it immediately. It was the voice of someone who had cried every tear they had and was now operating on something beyond grief. Something mechanical and necessary. "I'm sorry," she said. "So am I," he replied. The ranch appeared through the trees like something half remembered from a dream. A large log structure, 2 stories, added onto at different times. You could see where the wood changed color at the joins. A barn. A smokehouse. A kitchen garden that had gone mostly wild. Chickens wandering with the complete confidence of animals who know nobody has the energy to deal with them. And on the porch, 6 children. Arranged like a photograph nobody had posed for. The 2 smallest sitting on the steps. 3 in the middle. The eldest standing against the post with her arms crossed, watching the wagon come up the road with an expression that could have frozen a river. Elias pulled the horses to a stop. May climbed down before he could offer to help. She looked at the children. The eldest, a girl of maybe 13, black-haired, sharp-featured, her mother's eyes, if May had to guess, looked back with something close to open hostility. "Children," Elias said, "this is May Sutton. She's come to help." The girl on the porch said nothing. The 2 littlest ones stared up at May with wide, solemn eyes. And in that silence, May felt something she hadn't expected. Not pity. Not uncertainty. Something that felt, God help her, dangerously close to belonging. The eldest girl's name was Ruth. She was 13 years and 4 months old, and she had been running the Cord household since the day her mother's body went into the ground. She'd done it without being asked, without complaining, without once letting any of the smaller ones see her fall apart, though she had, plenty of times. Alone in the barn at night where nobody would hear. May figured most of this out within the first 48 hours. The morning after she arrived, she rose before dawn and went to start the kitchen fire. Ruth was already there. Already had the fire going. Was standing at the stove stirring a pot of cornmeal mush with the focused intensity of a woman twice her age. Wearing an apron that had been her mother's and was still slightly too large for her narrow frame. She heard May come in and her shoulders went rigid without turning around. "I have it," Ruth said flatly. "I can see that," May replied. She didn't try to take over. She simply went to the far end of the kitchen and began slicing bread. And Ruth watched her out of the corner of her eye with the wariness of a dog that's been kicked enough times to stop trusting outstretched hands. The other children were easier, or at least, more openly complicated. Thomas was 11, quiet and watchful like his father. The twins, Hannah and Bess, were 8, with an unnerving ability to communicate without speaking. 7-year-old James had a temper that flared fast and burned out quickly, like brush fire. And the baby, little Nora, was 2 years old and had attached herself to a rag doll she called Mama with a ferocity that broke something in the chest just to witness. May moved through those first days carefully. She didn't push. She didn't try to mother them. She cooked, she mended, she hauled water, she weeded the kitchen garden back into something workable. She was useful. She had told Elias that was what she intended to be, and she meant it. But the children tested her. James threw a plate on the third day, not at her, but near enough. The twins hid her sewing kit and watched silently to see what she'd do. Thomas asked her once, with the terrifying directness of an 11-year-old boy, "Are you going to try to be our mother?" "No," she said without hesitation. He seemed to consider this. "Why not?" "Because you already had one," May said. "And from everything I can see, she was worth keeping. I'm not here to replace her. I'm here because your father asked for help, and help is something I can give." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he went back outside, and that night he held the door open for her when her hands were full. It was a small thing. May noticed it the way you noticed the first crack of light before sunrise. Ruth was the harder one. On the fifth evening, May was outside at dusk beating dust from a rug when she heard it, a sound from inside the barn. Muffled. Rhythmic. The kind of crying that's been practiced into near silence. She stood at the barn door long enough to be certain of what she was hearing, and then she made a decision. She did not go in. She simply sat down on the fence post outside the barn and waited. 20 minutes. 30. Until the sound stopped and the barn door creaked open and Ruth stepped out, red-eyed and furious at having been caught in proximity to someone, even if that someone had said nothing. She looked at May with hot, defensive eyes. "I know you were listening," she said. "I wasn't," May said truthfully. "I was just sitting." Ruth stared at her, looking for the lie. May held her gaze without flinching. "She used to sit out here too," Ruth said finally, barely above a whisper. "In the evenings. Said it was the best light of the day." May looked at the sky. The Sierra foothills at dusk were extraordinary, deep purple and burning amber, the pines going black against it, the first star just appearing above the eastern ridge. "She was right," May said softly. Ruth didn't respond. But she sat down on the other end of the fence post, and they watched the sky go dark together without another word, and it was not comfortable exactly, but it was honest. And in May's experience, honest was always the better foundation. What she didn't know, sitting there in that quiet dusk, was that something else entirely was watching the ranch from the tree lean across the creek. Something that had nothing to do with grief, or children, or healing. Something dangerous was taking note of the Cord Ranch. And it had been watching for some time. His name was Vernon Holt. Not her late husband's family. Different Holts entirely. Though May, when she finally learned his name, felt the coincidence like a cold finger on the back of her neck. Vernon Holt had ridden into Coldwater 12 days after May left for the Cord Ranch, and according to the storekeeper, who had told Elias, who had told May on a quiet evening after the children were in bed, he'd asked specific questions. About the ranch. About Elias Cord. About the new woman who'd come to help with the children. "Why would someone be asking about us?" May had said carefully. Elias's jaw had tightened. Not fear exactly. More like recognition. Like a man who hears distant thunder and knows which direction the storm's been building from. "Cord Ranch sits on about 400 acres, he said slowly. 300 of those acres have a creek running through them. Pine Creek. Runs year-round, even in drought years. There's been interest in this land for a long time." "From who?" He looked at her. "From a man named Doyle Hicks. Railroad man. Not a railroad man himself, a man who buys land that railroads need and sells it for 10 times what he paid." "And Vernon Holt works for Hicks?" "Vernon Holt," Elias said quietly, "does whatever needs doing. He's been in 3 territories. Left bodies in at least 2 of them that I know of." May absorbed this. "And you haven't told the sheriff?" "Sheriff Pratt in Coldwater can barely manage a stolen horse," Elias said. "I told him anyway, for whatever good it'll do." Pratt wrote it down and looked at me the way a man looks at bad weather, acknowledged it exists, has no intention of doing anything about it. She'd lain awake that night, listening to the mountain silence, the creak of the house settling, Nora's small sounds from across the hall, the wind working through the pines. She'd thought about leaving. She'd considered it the way you consider jumping from a moving wagon, technically possible, practically disastrous. She thought about the children instead. About Nora and her rag doll. About Thomas holding open the door. About Ruth sitting beside her on the fence post, watching the last light drain out of the sky. She stayed. 4 days later, she saw him herself. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, sheets billowing in the morning wind, the air sharp and clean at this elevation, when she felt it. That specific awareness that arrives before information. The knowledge of being observed before your eyes locate the observer. She turned slowly. He was across the creek, maybe 60 yards off. Sitting still on a gray roan horse, in the shadow of the pines where the light didn't quite reach. Gray hat. Dark coat. The absolute stillness of a man who has practiced being overlooked. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't doing anything at all. Just watching. May didn't look away. She kept her hands on the sheet she was pinning and she looked directly back at him, across the creek and the 60 yards in the shadow. With an expression she had learned from 9 years of a hard marriage and 3 years of harder widowhood, an expression that said, "I see you and I am not as easy as I look." After a long moment, he turned the horse and rode back into the trees. Her hands were trembling slightly. She pressed them flat against the sheet until they stopped. That evening she told Elias. His face went carefully neutral in the way faces do when the news is confirming a fear rather than introducing one. "He's measuring something," Elias said. "Men like Holt don't show themselves unless they want to be seen. He wanted you to know he was there." "Why?" "To see what you'd do." "And what should I do?" Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, went to the cabinet above the fireplace, and came back with a short-barreled revolver. He set it on the table between them. "Can you shoot?" he asked. May looked at the gun. "My husband taught me," she said. "I'm not fast, but I'm accurate." Elias nodded. Left the gun where it was. But later that night, she heard him in the barn for a long time. When he came back inside, she saw through the small window that he'd saddled neither horse and carried nothing. He'd simply stood in the dark, the way men stand when they're calculating odds and finding the numbers don't work out the way they need them to. She understood something then, with a cold clarity she would have preferred to avoid. Whatever was coming, it was coming soon. And Elias Cord, for all his stone-jaw steadiness, was one man. One man with 6 children and 400 acres of creek water land that someone with resources and patience, and a man named Vernon Holt in their employ had decided they were going to have. It came on a moonless Thursday. May had been at Cord Ranch for 19 days. 19 days in which she had quietly, methodically built something she hadn't named yet, something between a routine and a lifeline. The kitchen garden was producing again. Nora had started reaching for May's hand sometimes, in that unconscious way small children reach for warmth without knowing they're doing it. Even Ruth had softened, marginally, carefully, like ice near a fire that doesn't quite know yet whether to melt. The night was absolutely dark. No moon. The stars hard and bright above the pines, the kind of clear, cold darkness that carries sound farther than it should. May was the first to smell it. She woke from dead sleep with the smell already in her throat. Wood smoke, yes, but the wrong kind. Not the banked warmth of the kitchen fire. Something rawer. Something that didn't belong to the house. She was at the window before she was fully conscious. The barn was on fire. Not fully, not yet. The flames were climbing the north corner, orange and climbing fast in the dry timber. The horses screaming inside with that particular animal terror that gets into the blood of anyone who's ever heard it. She ran into the hall and slammed her fist against Elias's door. "Fire! The barn!" She heard him hit the floor running before she finished the sentence. She went to the children's rooms next. Everyone up! Thomas, get the little ones to the creek! Now! Move! Thomas was already on his feet. Ruth appeared behind him, pale and electric with fear, and took Nora from her bed without being told while James and the twins scrambled out from under their quilts. Get to the creek, May said again, firm and calm, the way she'd heard it needed to sound. All of you. Don't stop. Don't look back. Thomas, you're responsible. Thomas looked at her, 11 years old, terrified, and deciding in real time whether he was capable of what was being asked of him, and then he straightened his spine and put his arm around James and moved. May grabbed the revolver from the shelf and went out the front door. The barn was 40 feet away and climbing. She could see Elias at the barn doors, had them open, was pulling at the horse's halters with everything he had, the animals half crazed, fighting him. She ran to help, got to the second horse, a bay mare who nearly took May's arm off in her panic, and between the two of them they got both animals out and crashing away into the dark. Then May turned. And there, at the edge of the firelight, just at the boundary between the orange glow and the dark, stood Vernon Holt. He had a rifle across his arm. Unhurried. Watching the barn burn with the composed expression of a man watching someone else's problem. He was not alone. 2 other men stood in the shadows behind him. Elias had turned and seen them. He stood 20 feet from May, empty-handed, breathing hard from the horses, with firelight throwing sharp shadows across his face. Cord, Holt said conversationally, like they were meeting at a church social. Mr. Hicks wants me to make sure you understand the situation. I understand it fine, Elias said. The offer stands. Fair price. Better than you'd get in court, and you would lose in court, and everyone in 4 counties knows it. Get off my land. Holt smiled. It was not a pleasant thing to look at. Here's the problem with that request, he said. I can't do that yet. Not until you sign something. He reached inside his coat and produced a folded paper. Held it out with 2 fingers, like an invitation. The silence stretched. The barn fire roared and crackled behind them, throwing light and heat in equal measure. May was standing 8 feet to Elias's left with the revolver in her hand and the hammer not yet pulled, watching Holt's eyes, watching his men in the shadows. Calculating the way Clara's ghost must have looked at that first notice on the flour sack. What is the risk? What is the cost? What can I actually do here? You burned my barn, Elias said very quietly. Accident, Holt said pleasantly. Terrible things happen to property out here. Isolated like this. No neighbors. No sheriff close by. He paused. Could happen to the house too. God forbid, with the children inside. The air changed. May pulled the hammer back. The sound was small and metallic and absolutely unmistakable in the burning night air, and every man present heard it. Holt looked at her. Really looked at her, for the first time since the night began. His smile didn't disappear exactly. It recalibrated. Lady, he said carefully. My name, May said, is May Sutton. And I'm accurate. What stopped the shooting that night was not courage. It was arithmetic. May was accurate, yes, she'd spoken the truth about that. But Holt had 2 men in the shadows behind him and the firelight was in her eyes, and accuracy means something very different when the targets can move and shoot back. Elias knew it. May knew it. And Holt, who had survived by being better at arithmetic than his opponents, knew it most of all. Everybody calm, Holt said. Still pleasant. The smile returned to its original position. Nobody needs to get hurt tonight. He folded the paper back inside his coat. I'll give you a week to think, he said. Mr. Hicks is a patient man. Generous, even, when people cooperate. He looked at Elias. 1 week, Cord. Then we come back and the conversation changes. He touched his hat brim. To May, of all things. Then he walked back into the darkness with his 2 men, and the night absorbed them like water absorbing ink. And then there was nothing but the burning barn and the smell of smoke and the distant sound of creek water and the children's voices somewhere downstream. Elias didn't move for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "You could leave." "I could," May said. "You should," he said. "This isn't your fight." She looked at the burning barn. She thought about Nora's rag doll. She thought about Ruth sitting on a fence post in the last of the evening light. She thought about Thomas straightening his spine in the hallway and deciding in real time what he was capable of. "No," she said. "May, no," she said again, flat and final, and that was the end of that. They gathered the children from the creek. All 6, cold and frightened and wrapped in each other. May held Nora while Elias took count, and for a suspended moment it looked exactly like what it was, a family in crisis, and the crisis had not broken them yet. But they had 1 week. The next morning, Elias rode to Coldwater. May stayed with the children, the revolver on the kitchen table like a centerpiece nobody commented on. He came back that afternoon with information that made everything worse. Sheriff Pratt had listened. Taken more notes. Explained, apologetically, that he couldn't arrest Vernon Holt for starting a fire he hadn't seen started, and that Doyle Hicks's land claims were currently under federal review. Which meant anything Pratt did could be construed as interfering with a federal proceeding, and did Elias have a lawyer? Elias did not have a lawyer. He also came back with news that Hicks had purchased 2 other properties on Pine Creek Road in the last year. Both sales had been preceded by incidents, 1 fire, 1 incident involving a broken wagon axle that left an elderly rancher stranded in December cold. Both previous owners had sold. Both were now in Reno or Sacramento, presumably alive, presumably not burning. The pattern was unmistakable. Hicks got what he wanted. Holt made sure of it. "There's something else," Elias said that evening. He and May were at the kitchen table after the children were in bed, the lamp between them, the night pressed against the windows. "I talked to a man named Garrett in town. Used to work for Hicks. 2 years ago, before Hicks let him go. And Garrett says Holt doesn't leave loose ends," Elias said. His voice was controlled. His eyes were not. "The people who signed, they signed and they left, and they were fine. But the ones who didn't sign..." He stopped. "What happened to the ones who didn't sign?" Elias looked at the lamp. "One disappeared. Mining claim up north. Just gone one spring. The other," he rubbed his jaw, "ruled an accident. Fell from his own roof, they said. Except Garrett said the man was 53 years old, and had never climbed a roof in his life." May sat with this. "Then we can't wait the week," she said. "No. And we can't run. Not with 6 children and nowhere to go." "Then we have to do something Hicks doesn't expect," May said. "Because he's bought sheriffs and patience and time. He's done this before and it's worked before. He's going to come at us the same way because the same way has always been enough." Elias looked at her across the lamp. "What are you thinking?" She was thinking about a lot of things. She was thinking about a flour sack notice on a post outside Decker's general store. She was thinking about what a woman with nothing to lose looks like from the outside versus what she actually has to offer. She was thinking about Garrett, the man who used to work for Hicks. "The man Garrett," she said. "He was let go. That means he's got a grievance." Elias was quiet, watching her think. "And if Hicks is running this kind of operation," she continued, "then it's not just here. It's multiple properties. Multiple counties. Which means there's a pattern of crime that goes well above Sheriff Pratt's pay grade. Federal," Elias said slowly. "The Nevada Land Office," May said. "Or a federal marshal. Someone who doesn't answer to Pratt or to Hicks." She looked at him steadily. "Can you write?" "Yes." "Then you're going to write the clearest, most factual account of everything that's happened on this property. Dates, events, names, witnesses. And I'm going to ride to Coldwater in the morning, and I'm going to find Garrett, and I'm going to get his account too. You can't ride into town alone. If Holt's watching, May said carefully, then the last thing he expects is for me to ride toward him. The silence in the kitchen was full and complicated. Elias Cord looked at this woman across the lamplight, this woman who had answered a notice on a flour sack, who had come to be useful, who had stayed when staying became genuinely dangerous, and whatever had been guarded in his eyes shifted slightly. You're the most unexpected person I've ever met, he said quietly. May almost smiled. Get riding, she said. She left at dawn. She didn't make it to Coldwater. They took her 3 miles out on Pine Creek Road. 2 men. Not Holt, Holt's men, stepping out from the tree line on either side of the track with the patience of men who'd been waiting since first light. Her horse spooked and she controlled it barely. And then she was surrounded with the clear and absolute understanding that screaming would accomplish nothing and reaching for the revolver would accomplish less. They brought her back. Not to the ranch, to a logging camp, half a mile north, where Vernon Holt was sitting on a stump drinking coffee from a tin cup with the serene manner of a man at complete leisure. He looked up when she arrived. I was wondering if Cord would send you, he said. Or if you'd volunteer. Where are the children? She said immediately. At the ranch. Nobody's touched the children. Mr. Hicks isn't a monster. He sends you to burn barns and threaten families, May said. So that's a matter of perspective. Holt smiled at that. He seemed, genuinely, to find her entertaining, which was somehow worse than hostility. Mrs. Sutton, he said. Here's where we are. Cord's a stubborn man. Stubborn men get other people hurt by accident. I'd like to resolve this without anyone getting hurt. Then tell Hicks to withdraw. I can't do that. Then we don't have anything to talk about. Actually, Holt said, setting down his cup, we have exactly one thing to talk about. You are not Elias Cord. You have no legal interest in that property. You don't have to be part of this. Ride south, Mrs. Sutton. Ride south and don't come back, and as far as I'm concerned, you were never here. May looked at him. At this man who had ridden through 3 territories and left bodies in at least 2 of them, who sat on a stump with his coffee like a country gentleman, who had burned a barn and threatened children with the practiced ease of someone who understood leverage the way a carpenter understands wood. She thought about what it had cost her to stay at Cord Ranch. What she'd given up, the small, careful, protected life she'd built in Coldwater. Safety. Distance. The wall she'd built, stone by stone, around everything the grief and the barrenness and the years of being found wanting had done to her. She thought about Nora reaching for her hand. No, she said. Holt studied her. You're not a fool, he said. So I have to assume you don't understand the position you're in. I understand it fine, she said, and heard Elias's words in her own mouth, and almost laughed. Then why? Because I'm not leaving those children, she said. Something happened in Holt's face. Something she didn't expect. A flicker of, not respect, exactly. Not sympathy. But recognition. The look of a man who has spent his life among people motivated by money and fear, suddenly encountering someone motivated by something else entirely, and finding it briefly, unexpectedly disorienting. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his coffee cup again. Get back on your horse, he said quietly. She stared at him. Go back to the ranch, he said. He was looking at the middle distance, not at her. Tell Cord I'm giving him until the end of the week, same as I said. After that, I don't control what happens. She didn't move immediately. She was looking for the trap. Why? She said. Holt didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, something flatter, something that sounded like a man hearing an old sound from far off. I had 6 brothers and sisters, he said. Grew up in Missouri. Poverty the kind you probably never saw. He paused. My mother left. One day. Just gone. And a woman came, neighbor woman, and she stayed with us for 2 years until my father found his feet. Didn't have to. Nobody asked her. He set down the cup again and looked at her directly. Go back to the ranch? He said. The letters reached the federal land office in San Francisco on a Wednesday, carried by Garrett himself, who had agreed, with the grim satisfaction of a man settling an old score, to make the ride personally. A federal marshal named Cross arrived in Coldwater 11 days later. He brought documentation. Investigation records from 2 other counties. The kind of evidence that doesn't come from a frightened rancher's letter alone, but had been building quietly in federal files for 2 years, needing only the right affidavit to become actionable. Doyle Hicks was indicted in Carson City before the month was out. Vernon Holt was nowhere to be found. Some people said he rode south, like he told May to do. Some said he went north, into the mountains. Nobody in 4 counties ever saw him again. May thought about what he'd said, about his mother, about the neighbor woman, and she did not say anything about it to anyone. She thought about it alone. The Cord Ranch stood. The creek still ran. Elias replanted the kitchen garden in the spring and built a new barn from pine timber he cut himself, with Thomas beside him learning the work. And sometimes May thought about Clara, the woman who had answered a notice on a flour sack and stayed and had 6 children and died in May, and she thought about what a woman's life adds up to and what it means and who it belongs to. She thought about these things the evening Elias came to find her at the fence post at dusk, the same post where she'd sat with Ruth in the last of the light. And he stood beside her for a while saying nothing. I put another notice up, he said finally. She looked at him. Not for a housekeeper, he said carefully. His voice was doing what it did when he was choosing words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. For something else. For. He stopped. Started again. I'd like you to stay. Not as hired help. As Elias, she said. Yes. I know, she said quietly. I know what you're trying to say. The Sierra foothills at dusk were extraordinary. They both looked at the sky, deep purple and burning amber, the pines going black against it, the first star appearing above the eastern ridge. She was right, May said softly. Best light of the day. Elias nodded. His hand found hers on the fence post. Carefully. Like something he'd been working up to for a long time. She didn't pull away. Nora found them there 20 minutes later, toddling out from the house in her nightgown with her rag doll under her arm. And she stopped at the foot of the fence post and looked up at May with enormous solemn eyes. May, Nora said, the first time she'd used her name. And May reached down and picked her up, and Nora settled against her shoulder with the complete and terrifying trust of small children. And the rag doll's name was still Mama. It would be for a long time yet, maybe forever, and that was all right. That was the way of things. You do not replace what has been lost. You do not fill the space where grief lives. You simply stand beside it, in the best light of the day, and you hold what you can. May Sutton had been called barren by people who thought they understood what she had to offer. They had not understood anything at all. There are women who come into a story quietly, answer a notice on a flour sack, and change everything. History doesn't often write their names down. But the children remember. They always do. And somewhere in the Sierra foothills, on a ranch where a creek runs year-round even in drought years, a fence post stands at the edge of a field, and the light at dusk is still, by all accounts, extraordinary.